didn't realize this until I looked it up. And I feel like we could probably talk about your one season in Quebec City for the next hour. But I didn't realize that you had Jacques Martin and Joel Quenneville on your staff there. And
Yeah,
I'm kind of doing the math. I'm like, man, you were young when you got your first NHL gig. I think you were 34. Does that sound right?
I was 33.
Wow,
33, got my first win before my 34th birthday. That was a strike shortened season. So
that's right.
when I started, we went through the entire training camp, and then the season got shut down at the end of training camp. And so I spent the next 4 months learning French. Um, so, si tu veux, on est continué en français, si tu veux.
Who was it? Who was Jacques putting you and Joel through your paces at that point, or?
Jacques was he was a godsend because he'd been in the league about 10 years by that time. And he had gone through what I was going through um, at a young age when he was in St. Louis because he took the job right out of junior after the Guelph. Forget whether it was the Storm or the Guelph Griffins
Yeah,
won the Memorial Cup in '86, and he got the job in St. Louis the next year. It actually was between Jacques and I for the
no
coach's
kidding.
job. We were the final two candidates, and it ended up that Pierre Lacroix he hired me, and he said, you're going to need the veteran assistant. He says, I really think Jacques outstanding, and that oftentimes happens. When through the interview process, general managers get to know a lot of people, and that's why they usually interview so many people because you never know what you're going to learn. Um,
Yeah.
as a general manager. And I knew Jacques. Jacques and I were friends. We had worked at Roger Neilson's hockey school for years. We lived very close to each other. We were about like less than an hour away from each other in eastern Ontario. And so we very quickly talked, and I was actually really thrilled that he would even consider coming and coaching with me. And it ended up being a godsend because both Joel and I were still relatively young as coaches. I mean, I had coached for 5 years, and Joel had coached basically for about three. And so we knew the NHL because we'd played there, but we didn't know it at the level that Jacques did. Coaching in St. Louis and coaching in Chicago with Mike Keenan for like I think at that time it had been about 7 or 8 years. So he was a veteran assistant, and that's exactly what we needed. And it was a dream team. It really was. We had Jacques Cloutier as our goalie coach,
Oh,
and
no way.
he formed up a real formidable staff. And with Pierre Lacroix at the helm, who was a young general manager, and I can always remember Cliff Fletcher telling me, he says, generally you don't want to go in with a young general manager, but even he had a good feel for Pierre Lacroix, and he says he's innovative and he's really a go-getting guy, and I think it'll work out well for you. When I was um, hired by Quebec City.
So I've been to the old Colisée, like great barn, and I've been into the Ramparts dressing room or the old Ramparts dressing room, which I'm assuming would have been your old facilities. I can't remember it specifically, but I'm gonna guess your coaching office wasn't much bigger than a broom closet. Can you paint a
uh,
picture of just how you guys operated back then and what that setup would have been like?
it was actually pretty professional. We were across the hall from the dressing room.
Okay.
And there was about three sections of the coach's office. We had a video room where, just the people who were doing reel to reel video in those days, everything
Hmm.
was off VHS. And you had to cut and paste and play and all that sort of thing. So it wasn't nearly as easy as it is now with the computers. But uh, we had a really good coaches room, and it had been an NHL room for a long time. So the Nordiques had a really nice facility, and there was a nice gym across the hall for the players. So it wasn't state of the art for that time, but it was more than comfortable and very very. I was thrilled with it because I'd been the previous 3 years in St. John's, Newfoundland, in an old building in the old Memorial Arena there,
Yeah.
and they did as much as they could to make everything comfortable. And at the end of the day, you probably don't need the extra space. If you're in a small confined
Yeah.
area, the ideas tend to flow a little better because you're always on top of each other, and at least you're always saying, "Hey, look at this, look at that," and that sort of thing. And the learning really does become apparent.
So I'm trying to you mentioned video, but obviously not as an efficient process as it is today. I'm assuming you didn't have an analytics department with the Nordiques
No.
back in those days. So you're making a decision, um, say tactically about how you want to play. How are you making that decision? Like, what percent is video playing into it, and how much of that is you, Jacques, and Joel sitting around and just having a healthy debate? And how would you ultimately decide what to lean on, whether it's gut, video, whatever, to make the final call?
Well, I will say it's not as complex as it is today, and I just think the evolution of all the technology and all the various systems that have been put in place through the years. Um, I've worked with pretty much every system at one point or the other because teams that you go to, unfortunately, I don't always get to stay in the same place as long as I want to. But at that time, we were watching the game. We were categorizing scoring chances. Really, was the biggest part of what we did at that time. I'm a disciple of Roger Neilson.
Yeah,
Jacques was a disciple of Roger Neilson, and we both watched the games similarly. We watched the games for the chances. You categorize the chance. You catalog the chance, and at the end of the game, that was your analytics. We had 21 scoring chances for, the other team had 16 scoring chances for. They broke down in the 7 ways that I've still continued to break down scoring chances, which are rush chances, forecheck chances, face-off chances, offensive zone chances. They're basically the 5-on-5 chances that you get, and then you have power play PK, and in those days it was a lot of 4-on-4 play. So that's how you'd break down your chances, and you'd have the other category of empty net goals. So I guess in retrospect there was 8 um, types of scoring chances that you have, and so that ended up being the basis of what we would make adjustments on. If we saw, oh geez, we gave up 8 OZP chances, then we
yeah.
better take a look at what we're doing in the defensive zone. And so we all had areas that we kind of looked at. Joel was basically defensive zone and penalty killing, and Jacques was power play and offensive zone play. And then we kind of all kind of gave input into how we went in the other giant categories, which were the forecheck, how we counterattacked, how we move the puck, what type of options we'd use heading up the ice. So a lot has changed, but a lot has remained the same in the sport. And you still find that even with the analytics today, it's still based off of how you defend, how you get out of your zone, how you attack through the neutral zone, and how you try to generate scoring chances.
Yeah, no, so true, right? I mean, just look at the playoffs now. Like, you can have all the analytics and information in the books, but if you don't win puck races, good luck.
Yeah.
It's still
You
a
know, with
simple game.
puck battles, is the biggest thing. So nowadays, you've got the ability to really categorize the puck battles, which I think is such a big thing because now you're looking at who actually is winning them,
Yeah,
and who are they winning them against, and the teams that win the more puck battles in the game almost always win. So that's that's very much uh, in coherence with the people that gets the most scoring chances usually win. The
yeah.
people that get the most shots usually win. The people that score first usually win. So kind of everything kind of molds in together, but you've got to find a way to defy the odds, I guess, every now and then, and you got to learn to win ugly. Sometimes you got to win games that you have no business deserving, with good goaltending and maybe just solid team defense, which we've seen a lot of in this playoff. That Edmonton Vancouver series was one where you know it really didn't matter if teams outchanced and outshot and outworked. It ended up just how well you defended and how well you cleared the puck and got out of trouble. That ended up being the thing that carried the day on a lot of those games.
Yeah, my observation from that series in particular, and I think probably to a certain extent Vancouver and Nashville as well, was the defense that occurred in zone, in the sense that it wasn't necessarily happening in the neutral zone and stopping the puck from coming into your zone, but it was just eliminating shots getting to the net. It seemed like just getting comfortable with defending, being patient, and but just not giving up shots to the net. Because I mean, there's a couple of those Edmonton Vancouver games. Like Edmonton only had like 14 shots. Like they were in the mid teens. Like I don't know how many times that happened over 82 games for them.
Yeah, it happened a lot more for Vancouver. I think they were really comfortable with how they were in the defensive zone and that big group of defensemen and so many good shot blockers when you think of Ian Cole,
Yeah,
Susie, and then you even go with Myers. I mean, he was so good with the long stick, and Zadorov, and even guys like Quinn Hughes and Veronic were guys that just positionally I thought were so sound. And again, they won a lot of secondary battles off of the shot. So the races to the puck, the races to the rebounds, those sorts of things, they ended up being crucial in that series. And you make a good point. I mean, the Nashville series was probably even paramount to that, but we always look at the closest series that we've seen.
so I don't want to jump around, but I want to let you. I mean, you're coming off a really interesting playoff run where you sweep the first two rounds, and then you get in against Lausanne. And on paper, you look at the box scores, and that just looked like a chess match through 7 games. Where Zurich, you guys win the first game, and then it just goes back and forth till to game 7. And there was two, I think, on one occasion, 3 days between games. So you play a game. What's your process to dissect that game and decide what information goes to the players, and how much, based at this stage of your career, how much do you feel like you might be able to massage or maybe change the strategy from game to game at that point in the season?
Well, you're always watching the game, and again, I go back to my Roger Neilson days. You go back. What I do, my thing is I still really enjoy watching the scoring chances. And my staff, Rob Cookson, who's a
Awesome.
longtime NHL video coach, longtime assistant coach with Calgary Flames, Ottawa Senators, and Chicago and Philadelphia. He had a really good career in the NHL as well. Um, he's really good at looking for the various areas. So, like, he takes the defensive zone and how we're playing in the defensive zone. So he'll watch that and make recommendations. Um, I'm responsible more for offensive zone play with the team and uh, basically what we do through the neutral zone, both offensively and defensively. So we kind of shared that responsibility um, along with our other assistant Fabio Schwartz, who's a young Swiss guy who's going to be a great coach. He just did a terrific job for us. And the other thing that he was so good at was just the interaction with the players, because even though everybody speaks English and everybody's perfect in English, when you have somebody that can actually speak the player's language, it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. The small points are not missed. So he was terrific there. And we have a Swedish goalie coach, Magnus Svenstrom, who is way more than a goalie coach. He he actually talks so much about defending and he'll talk about the opposition goaltender a lot. And so you're picking up points from him. So very much as a collective
Yeah.
group. But we do end up talking about the adjustments that we have to make. And our program was, we'll watch the game on the bus coming back together. We're all watching our own computers, and there's a lot of sharing of information between the four coaches as we're all watching our separate computers, saying, "Did you see this? Did you see that?
Yeah.
Take a look at this. Here's what happened." I'm like, "Oh, you may not have caught this in the game." So that happens, and then in the morning you're really dissecting it because you're putting together what you're going to show the players that day.
Yeah.
And usually we have a short video presentation for them, and it can vary. can vary. Sometimes it's all positive because you really want to keep them uplifted and you want to keep them moving forward. Sometimes you have to show a few of the mistakes so that that you're responsible enough that you're doing your part to make sure that they don't happen again. And you try to do that in as constructive a way as you can. I've probably adjusted more that way in my coaching career than anything. I think now it's not about who says it. It's not about um, whether you're right or you're wrong. It's about how you say it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I've learned a great deal from is being constructive with the players and doing it in a calm manner where they can appetize. They can digest. So especially in the playoffs, you don't want to have guys worrying about getting a dress down uh,
Yeah.
in video session in the playoffs because there's just not enough time to adjust. So you try and do it as constructively, and that's probably the best way to do it at the best of times. But especially in the playoffs where there's so little time between games, you want to make sure that you're as constructive as you possibly can. But we'll do a video session that day, and then the beauty of our program in Europe is you're not worried about the travel fatigue. I mean, our longest trip in the Swiss league is 3.25 hours. So you're in your bed. You're back home after a game, even it went into
So you
overtime
wouldn't stay at a
or
hotel all year, other than maybe the Champions League.
we're in our own beds every night, and so that really helps such a great deal because you now can practice. We didn't practice much the day after we played, especially as it got into the 7 game series against Lausanne. Um, but we would have the extra skate, and we usually would have them come in for a meeting and a warm up with our strength and conditioning coach, and that ended up being just a great formula. And the guys, while sometimes maybe they would have liked to stay in their beds a little bit longer because players, even in this day, they still love to sleep. They love to sleep. They put out so much energy in the games
Yeah.
that they need their rest. But at the same time, it's nice to have them come to the rink, and we usually would feed them as they came to the rink as well. So you end up accomplishing a number of goals. They come in, they get a little bit of a workout, they get a little bit of a message that they're hopefully going to carry into the next game. And they get to be together. And that's such a big thing because they're going through it together. It's nice that they get a short time to be together on every day during the playoffs.
So I mean, this is your second tour in Zurich, and so I know you guys obviously won, and I had a chance to go back. I watched a bit of the game seven. Um, what a scene there! I mean, just everything from you guys got the new building, the fan. I mean, I know everybody talks about the in game experience, say in a Canadian market in the playoffs, and it's great.
Yeah.
But I mean, what I saw on tape was at par, if not even greater.
Oh yeah.
What would how would you compare that experience to what we see in the National Hockey League?
Well, it's never ending. It starts from moment one and it doesn't end until they leave the rink, and it carries on out after the game outside of the arena, and the there's a fan section in everybody's arena for the visiting fans,
Yeah,
and so that can get pretty loud and that can get pretty raucous.
yeah,
There's so much security at European games, especially in the Swiss league, so that
really,
there
wow,
aren't those incidents that maybe have happened in the past. People are very very passionate about their home teams. In Zurich, if you're a fan of the Zurich Lions, you don't cheer for another team when you come to the game. There's no there's no appreciating
like
a
that was a
great
good
player
play
on
or
the other
whatever.
team.
Yeah,
No, you're there and you're there to cheer for ZSC Lions, and if you're Lausanne, you're there to cheer for Lausanne, and it's passionate. They have every organization has songs that they sing during the game and chants that they have
wow,
during the game, and it's such a passionate spectacle, and it's that way throughout the league. So our building is no less unique, and I think that's why it was such a comfortable atmosphere and such an intimidating atmosphere when you try to win in opposition buildings. A little more so than in the National Hockey League. In the National Hockey League, it's just there's somewhat of a separation, between the fans and the playing field. In Europe, it just seems that they're even more involved, with their whistling and their constant attention to everything that's happening. The NHL playoffs rivals it, but you'd have to be there and actually see it in person to see how great a European playoff game is. It's crazy. It really does rival the football, the
Yeah.
European soccer mentality. It's wild to say the least.
Well, it's on the bucket list for sure. And I look at so that series. You win Game 7, obviously. You win Game 5, both shutouts. Um, not I don't think any coach gets up in front of their team and says we got to pitch a shutout tonight. Obviously, we want to play well defensively, but when you look at in that playoff run, what might have been the details um, that your team was maybe just a little bit better at in those two games defensively that allow you to shut the other team down?
I thought it ended up becoming a very much a matchup series. Jeff Ward, who's
Yeah,
did a great job in Lausanne. I mean, he's a top coach in Europe, and he did a great job with Lausanne. So in the series, we had probably a little bit more depth of scoring, and they had a little bit more depth of size and strength. And so it ended up in games 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 being very much about matchups. When they were at home, they were able to match up our top line with a line that really suited playing against them. And we had Dennis Malgin and Sven Andrighetto playing on our top line along with Rudy Balsers. Um, all three of those guys played in the NHL. All three of those guys are top players for their countries, Latvia and Switzerland.
yeah,
And it ended up being they were, key guys on our power play as well. So 5-on-5, when they got the matchup that they wanted, it wasn't that it was better or that we didn't get any less chances, but they ended up being a little bit more comfortable when they had the matchups that they
yeah,
wanted. And when we were at home, we really would make them work to try and get the matchups, and that seemed to help us a little bit more. You have to have depth in the playoffs. You have to have more than one line going, and you need scoring from secondary scorers, just like in the National Hockey League. You need those bottom six goals. You need um, those guys playing shifts where they change momentum in the game, and we got a lot of that. So I was always really proud of the contributions we got from throughout our lineup. But you make a great point. Just like in the NHL, um, if you want to win, you got to defend well
yeah,
because everybody is doing all of the right things in the playoffs. The attention to detail on your forecheck, the attention to detail on getting pucks to the net, the attention to detail on how you're traveling and getting above the puck. It's at a premium, and everybody is doing it. So if you don't understand how you're defending and you're not having the habits that are necessary to have good defensive play, make people come through your body, making sure that you're got heavy sticks in the defense zone in front of the net, making sure you're making your clears and putting it in spots where it's not in a position to get a secondary chance. Um, then you're going to have difficulty. And we were lucky. We had not only great goaltending, but we had really good defensive players. And people like Christian Marty, who just finished playing for the Swiss at the World Cup, and Dean Kukin, they played exceptionally well for us. And our whole defense, whether it was Mikko Lehtinen, and, you go on in our group, Yannick Weber, who played so long in the National Hockey League with Nashville, Montreal, Vancouver. Um, he was absolutely terrific. He had a resurgence of youth, and he had one of the best playoffs I've ever seen anybody have in my time over here. And we lost him in the last series, so we had to dig down and find a way to win without a guy who was probably playing our best. And those are the things that you need to have happen, no matter where you are in the playoffs. Unlikely sources have to step up,
Yeah.
give you a little bit more, and we had that happening all over the place. And that's usually why you win.
You mentioned, I want to go back to the line matches. So I can remember my first coaching gig in junior A in the BCHL when I wasn't qualified at all. But my first gig was like our head coach Dale Marquette would say, "Okay, Aaron, you're going to watch, your number one job in game is to watch the other team's bench, and I want you to get a feel for how they're rotating their players, especially if we were on the road, and see if you can give me some insights on who might be coming up next." So I would sort of number the lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I would keep track the order. I would circle if it was a power play, but I don't know how scientific or how valuable that was in the moment. But I wonder, when you're on the road, do you have any hacks for how to manage your bench, or maybe try and avoid the matchup that the home team's trying to line you up with, or maybe how you is there any sort of advantages you can gain?
Well, I think you always, first of all, have to take advantage of what the rules are. The visiting team has to put their players out first, and it happens quickly. And there's a lot of emotions in and around the bench. So usually, if you're waiting, a lot of times as a savvy veteran coach, you'll wait as long as you can to put people out there because
Yeah,
you know that this is happening. And
yeah,
so, you'll wait the last second because sometimes you can disrupt the opposition team just by making good players, especially who don't think that they should have to worry about a matchup, sit on the bench for long periods of time. Um, so for me, it's awareness. Sure, you want to look at your video and you want to see how the coach generally deploys his people. And so if it's a straight rotation, usually that's easy. You kind of have an idea in your mind of which lines are coming. But if you're waiting on the bench, then you want to try and make your decisions uh, as quickly as you can and have it in your mind what the matchups are. I think it's really important. We always visit our matchups at breaks. So over in Europe, we had the one power break, and that's where the coaches come together. And how do you think the matchups are? And you're talking to the people upstairs, and you're getting information from the other people on your bench about how they feel it's going. And that's the head coach's job to kind of to delegate and say, hey, listen, I want this guy against that guy. I want to make sure that I'm getting this matchup and come to an agreement that way. So it's a little bit on bench and bench management, and it's a little bit of utilization of your staff. And then the biggest thing is just being aware of what's going on the other side. If you see someone is injured and they've moved people to another line, and that's going to affect your matchup, then you have to make an adjustment quickly. And again, I think it comes down to a little bit of instinct, but a lot more is the preparation that you do before in viewing and seeing what's happening with those teams and when they play well and how they implement.
I just think it's so interesting that you brought up that one of the strategies might be, if you know that there's a matchup that the opposition wants with, say, their best players, you could just avoid putting those players out and try and keep those guys on the bench. That's a great
Oh
uh,
yeah,
teachable moment.
yeah, and I think it's human nature too. Like
Yeah.
if you're sitting there and for instance, you're Wayne Gretzky and Yari Curry, they're probably sitting there saying, "We don't need to worry about who's up against us. We're better than them." And
Yeah.
and that's prevailing thought of a lot of great offensive players. They don't think they ever have to worry about a matchup. And maybe coaches sometimes we worry too much about matchups. So it's having a feel for that too, because sometimes you can disrupt your team by
Sure.
holding people back a little bit and worrying about a matchup too much. So I think that sometimes again is what I've learned over my career is to just trust your instinct. If you really feel strong about it and you really feel it's necessary that you have it, then stick with it. But if it's a case where maybe it's affecting the bench and the morale a little bit. Maybe you got to give a little bit and let the players find a way to work their way through a tough matchup. So there's no correct answer, but I think coaches always have to be aware of the various things that are happening within your bench, because that's the most important bench that you take care of is yours, not the other teams.
Um, over the course of your career, and I'm sure that regardless of where you've coached, you're preparing to the best degree that you can. But who would have been the coach where just you personally are like, man, I got to be sharp tonight, or I got to be a little
Scotty
bit more.
Bowman, without a question.
Really, no question, eh?
Oh, was a master. And he watched everything that you did. And he had a computer like mine, and he was amazing. He really was. And to try and match which was him was really it was a pleasure first and foremost when I look back at it. But I mean, you had to be on your toes. And thankfully, when we had those great matchups with Colorado Avalanche and the Detroit Red Wings, we had similar teams. They had Fedorov and Yzerman. We had Sakic and Forsberg. So it was kind of that matchups, and then the third lines matched up really well. Whether it was the McCarty Draper checking line with Maltby and those guys, and we had Stefan Yell and
Yeah,
Mike Ricci on our third line. Mike Ricci on our third line, he was a great offensive player.
yeah,
So we had some really good battles in those series, and that carried on. I coached against Scotty with Vancouver as well, and again we had a good um, battle. And I think part of the reason that we took them to 6 games in Vancouver in 2002 was the fact that we matched up pretty good with them because we had Brendan Morrison, Bertuzzi, and Naslin who could match one of those Fedorov and Yzerman lines. And by that time, I think they had Zetterberg in there and Dadzuk. So like it's always about being able to match the best players, but it's about playing in a total team game too. But Scotty was outstanding. He was really good, and he saw and he understood the value of having the right people on the ice at the right times, but against the right people.
well, I want to talk about that rivalry, and I think it's no secret that there was some bad blood to say the least between Colorado and the Red Wings at that stage. But it's interesting. We had Barry Smith on the show earlier this season, and I asked him the same question. He goes, no, he goes, what made that as intense as it was? He goes, obviously there's the Claude Lemieux incident on Chris Draper. He's like, was there bad blood? For sure there was. But he goes, what really made that um, a boiling pot was that you had. He's like, good players know they're good players, and he goes, nothing motivates a good player like going up against another world class player. He's like, these guys all know they're the best of the best, and he's like, there was a respect, like everybody knew how good the other team was, and he goes, that really fueled it, and it was a kind of a unique cocktail. And I don't know if we'll ever see rosters comprised of that much talent
Yeah.
in today's game as you saw then. But I kept coming back to this, Mark, like, and maybe we need to bring your daughter Caitlin in here and she'd have some better insights. But you talk about going up against Scotty Bowman. The year you win the cup in Colorado, if I'm doing the math, you're 35 years old. You're
Yeah.
going up against the greatest coach of all time, and you're going toe to toe. Like in that moment, did it occur to you? I don't want to say it was a mismatch, but like, how did you feel? Was there any imposter syndrome, or were you in the moment and felt like, hey, this is what I'm here to do?
Well, I think I didn't think about it too much. I knew we were a really good club, and we had such good leadership on that team, and the guys that had been there before. You mentioned a few of them: Claude Lemieux, Mike Keane, Patrick Waugh, Troy Murray, all guys that had won Stanley Cups, all guys that had been pivotal points, pivotal leaders on their teams. and they knew the league probably better than I did. And they just the messages that they gave to the players in between periods about we can beat these guys, and convincing the players, that the young players at that time, because Sakic and Forsberg were still very young. Adam Foote was in his infancy as a defender, and you keep going on down our list. We had really a youthful team. Adam Deadmarsh, um, John Clem on defense. You just keep going on down the list. But we had enough veteran savvy guys that had been through the wars and had learned how to win in Montreal, especially, in the cases of Keane, um, Lemieux, and Waugh. They'd all learned from Bob Gainey, and they'd all learned from Larry Robinson, and they'd all learned from all those great Montreal teams. And those guys learned from the teams before them, and so on and so on and so on. And the unique part of it all was Scotty goes back to the 50s, being with those teams. So when you look at his career, it's just amazing to see, how he developed as a player first, and then a coach, and then, an executive. And I was always very much a fan of Montreal and their system, because my father had been in their system, and I knew, his passion, and going back to the days of Frank Selke. So it's very much, there's a place in hockey for history, but when it comes down to the matchups, it's a lot of times it's about players who know how to win, and that can comfort players when things get really testy, and you're tested to the nth degree. Those are the players that carry you through. Most often, it's not the coach that carries you through, and it certainly wasn't with the '96 Avalanche. It was a combination of me maybe not making a lot of mistakes, and the players just going out and flat out playing. They knew who the great players on the other side was, which was your point, that Barry Smith probably did a little bit better than I'm doing, but they knew exactly how they had to play against Fedorov. They
Yeah.
they all respected Yzerman so much, just like the Red Wings respected Joe Sakic so much.
Yeah.
Those were both players that almost like you'd apologize when you'd hit them. And
No, I believe it. Yeah.
they would get up and they would go that much harder. Like both Joe and Steve Yzerman would sit there and they'd be going, "Oh, great hit, yeah." And they get up and they go faster, and that would frustrate players even more, which is the way that you should be doing it in a game. But it was an evenly matched group, and it was real passionate hockey. And of course, you always need villains. You always need great guys, and those series had that intrigue, and it had that type of characteristics and characters in the series. So that's what made it so special.
So you get to raise the Stanley Cup your second year as a National Hockey League head coach. In that 2-year window, what would have been the thing that you needed to learn that enabled you, that you didn't know going in, that you maybe figured out, that helped you or empowered you to kind of to lead a group like that?
I think probably the thing that I learned earlier in the career was just the program that you need. And by program, I mean just the structure, not so much on the ice, but more in the day, how important that is. Like, because hockey players are still such big creatures of habit. They need to have their practices at the proper time. They need to have their meetings at the proper time. You can't throw them out of sync. And it's a small thing, but we did a lot of planning in terms of when we met. We practiced in the afternoons in those days. We would give the players all morning at home with their families, and they wouldn't have to come in till about 2 o'clock or 2:30. Yeah, and so in those days we had afternoon practices, and then the players would always stay in a hotel, even at home, and that came from Montreal. So the Montreal teams, because I guess it was so haywire when they were at home, because the passionate fans of Montreal, you couldn't walk 2 steps without being involved with some type of conversation. They would protect the players by keeping them at a hotel, and a lot of times it was outside the city of Montreal, so they got I mean, I remember Dick Duff telling me back in the days when he was playing for the Canadians in the 60s, he says, yeah, we used to stay outside of the city. We were never even allowed to be in the city because the coaches told Blake and people like that just they didn't want distractions. And so I think that was the biggest learning curve is eliminate the distractions for the players, try and help them with their focus as much as you can, and have a program that allows them to put all their energies into doing what's most important, which is trying to solve the great teams that they're playing against. And it's no small task, but that was something that I've carried with me throughout my career. And, budgets kind of change from places to place, but it's still important that you don't disrupt the normal flow of a player's day. Nowadays, players really love staying at home, and
Yeah.
they don't want to be in hotels for unnecessary time. Uh, and so, we try to really manage our days well on playoff days and playoff non-days, and we try and give them as much time at home with their families as they possibly can have. I think the professionalism of the players, while it hasn't gotten better, it's just changed, and and they're so in tune with the information about how they have to prepare and how they
Yeah.
have to prepare physically. And I think with the advent of strength and conditioning coaches, and every team's got about three or four in the National Hockey League, and even in Europe, we've got a couple of guys that work with our team. You're giving the players everything they need to make their bodies ready physically, to make their minds ready mentally, and so hopefully that if we're doing all those right things, they can go out and they can perform at their best. Because it is challenging, that 60 minutes when you're playing whistle to whistle, boy, that's demanding time, and they've got to be ready both physically and mentally, and maybe even a little bit spiritually to get it all done.
That's a great point. That's a great point. You mentioned in the playoffs, that experience and how valuable that is. And so, if we looked at, say, the Vancouver Edmonton series, as that series progressed, my sense was that Edmonton got through because they had had their heart broken already, and that
Yeah.
maybe fueled them a little bit. Where Vancouver didn't have a lot of players with that experience. And then I look at, I mean, as much as I've been doing this, I look at, say, the Edmonton Dallas series right now. Game three, Edmonton comes out, they get that quick lead, and you're watching the game, and you're like, Dallas doesn't have a chance. Like, Edmonton is just on fire. The arena's bananas. Like, Dallas can't make a play. And I remember shutting the TV off, and then came back to it. I'm like, Dallas is winning now.
Yeah.
Like, what happened? How do you in a moment sway the momentum? And then fast forward to last night, Dallas comes out, gets the two quick goals. I mean, you talk about, like, they're on the right side of every puck. They're first to every puck. It's textbook. Same thing. Turn the TV off, put my little guy to bed, turn it back on. I'm like, as long as I've been doing this, that still amazes me how teams in a moment can say, hey, we're good. We're good. And I don't think maybe I'm wrong. I don't sense as much of a technical thing, but it's maybe a coach saying, there's 100 things we could focus on right now, but if you focus on this one thing, it might help us sway it back in our favor.
Yeah. And I think you also need to recognize that oftentimes it's player driven too. Um, the one thing that I would say is all the teams that have ever won with, whether I've been a player or whether I've been a coach, an assistant coach, um, um, or even this last season, it's the similarity of the teams is the teams are close. They have a unique closeness, and they are player driven. So the players, even though the coach is giving lots of the messages that you just stated, it really comes down to the players building buy-in and their inner language that happens in the dressing room when you're not there, or on the bench when maybe you're not paying attention. Those are the things that I think happen. And I had the same exact thoughts as you watching that Edmonton game three. Saying, "Oh my God, they've really gone to another level." the Oilers. And so, I can only think that not only Peter DeBoer, but I think Jamie Benn probably had a lot to say, and probably, a guy like Sagan, who's having such a good playoff at such a time in his career because he's had so much disappointment in his career. And you talked about, the Oilers when they played Vancouver, same thing. Yeah, I think you were absolutely right. The Vancouver young players had not gone through the disappointment. And those tough lessons are so hard to learn, but it almost seems like you can't win very often without having been served those lessons. And that's the same no matter where you play. So I think it's a combination of all those attributes. Having a coach that knows what he's doing, having players that care so passionately and at a different level that they're willing to put themselves out on the line and say something that needs to be said in the room
Yeah.
about how we're going to play and how we have to adhere to maybe the messages that are being given. And I think when you get that happening, it's such a powerful combination. And then you see it on the ice. And so you see it
Yeah.
in how Edmonton stormed back last night against the Dallas Stars to tie up the series. It's been great hockey this playoffs. I don't think the coaching has ever been better. I don't think the players have ever been better. And it's just really neat to see every series being so so many battles in every series that you just have a pleasure getting engaged in, and it's fun to watch.
No, it's been great theater, and it seems like it's the competition's getting tighter as it moves along, which isn't always the case. Sometimes it seems to loosen up or teams run out of steam. But this was interesting. So I'm going back through your career, and I ran out of time last night.
Mhm.
I can't validate this, but since you first stepped foot in the NHL as an NHL head coach, I'm willing to bet, based on my limited research, that no one has coached more Hall of Fame players than you have. And so it would make sense that you know what that type of player looks like.
Yeah,
What were your first impressions when you first saw Auston Matthews?
that you know what? It's oh my God, I'd forgotten how good a great player looks like, and
Really?
it reminded me of the guys that I'd seen at young ages before. I mean, I remember Peter Forsberg coming in and into Quebec that first year, that first training camp, and going, "Oh my God, this guy's at an ungodly level." Just
Yeah.
how he could protect the puck and skate with power and that sort of thing. Auston Matthews, it was his shooting and his puck skills were just off the charts. And um, I would say more so than the amazement that I saw when watching him, it was watching the Swiss players see him, because the Swiss players they can be a little bit entitled at times, and I don't mean that as poorly as it sounds, but they're hard to impress. And
Sure.
everybody was going, "Oh, we've got an import." Like in Switzerland, you're only allowed to have six import players, and at that time there was only allowed to have four. So usually you wanted your imports to be really good. And here we had invested in an 18-year-old kid who was still draft eligible, and and the Swiss players were always going, "How the heck is an 18-year-old player going to be able to play at this level?" Well, after the first practice, I had about five players come to me and say, "That guy's pretty good. Okay, he could probably play with me."
Yeah.
So, I thought that was probably the biggest compliment that could happen is the Swiss veteran players saw very early, "Oh my God, this guy is at a different level." And that was my exact feelings when I saw Austin. I mean, I watched him at the U20, uh, the World Junior with the
Yeah.
USA. He was good, but he wasn't great when he was 18
That's
years
what I
old.
mean. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that was when he was 17. I'm sorry. He was good, but he wasn't great. But by the end of the year at the U18, which was in Switzerland that year, and so I was sitting with Pat Brisson, and I was watching him there, and I was going, "Oh my God!" And Pat had already talked to me about the possibility this kid might need a place to play next year. And so We ended up trying to convince him to come. I went to the draft that year in Florida, talked with his parents there, talked with them in Switzerland while we were there. We gave them, a visit to our facilities at the time, and kind of made our spiel about why we thought he should come and play with us. And it took a long time. We had to keep going back over it. And then there ended up being a few legal problems. And thankfully, at the time, Pat Brisson was his agent, found a way to get everything solved. And I thought he did a great job for Auston that year, because I thought that was a really good year for Auston in terms of growth. He became a man, and he was so much ready at the end of the year, and you saw it at the end of the year. Um, he didn't play great for us in the playoffs, but our whole team did. We had a great season. We had no adversity throughout the entire season, and we got beat
Yeah.
4 straight in the playoffs. So the adversity came in the playoffs, and like my old coach Harry Neal used to say, when you have a slump in the playoffs, they don't last long.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So um, you know, but he was so ready. He went to play for the U.S. at the World Championship, and right there he was good, and everybody saw. Again, they've been watching him all year because he was the #1 draft pick. But then he got that chance to play for the world team, or for the under 20 team, under 22 team at the World Cup of hockey that
Yeah.
year, and
That's right.
he
That's
was
right.
absolutely marvelous there. I
Yeah.
remember, being in Ottawa. I went back to coach in Ottawa, and watching games in Ottawa and Montreal live, just being so happy for Auston. And again, so amazed that his transformation was happening again. Like, you have to find the level that you're playing at, and he was so good at finding the level, no matter where he went. And I was very lucky to have a firsthand view, not only when he was 17 years old, but also 18, and then again as he was turning 19, that first year in the National Hockey League. And I got to see his first game too, because it was against us, and he scored
Oh,
four
of
goals that one.
course.
That was a memorable night too. But we won that game. We won
You
that
did an
game.
OT. That's right.
Yeah,
I know that because my little guy's got a
yeah.
book. It's on hockey, and one of the chapters is on the 4 goal game, and so we've read it a
A great
zillion
little
times.
story about that. Guy Boucher, who had also coached in Switzerland with us, and
Yeah.
Guy's a great mind, and he's really an analytical guy. But during the game, he was so involved with what we were doing. He wasn't really paying attention to who was scoring on the other
Oh,
team.
really?
And he came in at the end of the second period. He says, your guy's having a good game on the other side, eh? He says, he's got a couple goals. I said, he's got three.
Back to the line matchup
Yeah,
conversation. The huddle. Yeah, no kidding. Um, Mark. So you've coached a lot of world class players. Um, But like Auston Matthews, you've coached a lot of world class players when they were first breaking in, and that we've seen it play out so many times. I mean, sometimes players need just a tiny bit of runway to get going. Sometimes they need a little bit more till they find their groove. What have you learned? Be it Forsberg, the Sedins, Matthews, and I know I'm leaving out a bunch of players, but what do you know about setting those players up for success and maybe that balance of saying, hey, we got to maybe let them fail a little bit but put them back out there, or give them another chance to really find their footing.
yeah, and I think it is that exact point, is that you have to be conscious when you're playing young players that a they're going to get better. And I've never seen any young player that didn't improve from the first games that they've played to when they become bona fide National Hockey League players. So the practices are a big part of where the improvement happens, but it is opportunity. Um, you, if you expect that a player can't handle it, then usually they won't handle it. But if you expect them to go out and play and give you their best, then you'll be surprised at what they can do with you.
Yeah,
You got to protect them and try to put them in positions where they can have success. You got to play them with people that will help them, and maybe not only help them as players with feeding them good passes, but also, maybe covering up for them every now and then, but also talking to them the right way, because young players are impressionable, and they learn more. And I learned this from Pat Quinn. Pat Quinn always would tell me, he'd say, Mark, he says, in my day, it was always the veteran players taught the younger players. And he said, that still happens. And it is so true. If veteran players like young players, they're going to give them the time of day. They're going to give them the tutelage that maybe they need, and the things that even, a seasoned coach doesn't know. Those little tricks of the trade, or that little information about this player on the other team. Oh, don't do that to him. He's going to end up putting a message in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
back of his mind and getting ready to get you at another time. So uh, I always felt that it was good to play them with the right people, and if you can match them up, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to match them up with the absolute perfect people, but you try and do the best you can, and I think it's giving opportunities important, but also recognizing that it's what you expect. If you're going to expect them to be ready, then show some care for them, and show some responsibility for them. I think the guy that does the best job of it right now, Marty St. Louis, does such a good job of that in Montreal, and you can see how many young players have gained their footing in Montreal, and it starts with the messaging from him. His messaging, I think, for his young players it's always spot on, and he wants those guys to go out and show them what he can. And I think, again, for me, I always thought, you got to protect them when they need protection, but you also kind of got to let them swim in the deep end of the pool, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, no, and I think the advice you just gave is so important because I mean it's putting a player on the ice, I guess isn't always created equal. I think this is very much a coaching's a human business, and players can sense
Yeah,
if their coach believes they can do it or not. If they feel like, man, he's shitting bricks the whole time I'm out here, that we're gonna get scared. Like players are gonna feel that, and that likely is gonna impact their play. But you talk about putting players together. And I know this Scott Rintoul did a great job of releasing a podcast on the West Coast Express. So Brendan Morrison, who we've started connecting with, and Marcus Naslin and Todd Bertuzzi. Um, Man, chemistry is a funny thing, right? Like sometimes the obvious um, collection of players doesn't work out, and then sometimes you put Anson Carter with the Sedins, and
yeah.
you got magic. Um, Two parts. One, how did that line come together, and just in general, what have you learned about chemistry and maybe some underlying tells that would signal to a coach who might fit well together?
Well, if you're talking about the West Coast Express line, I think talent makes good lines. So, when you have talented players usually like playing with other talented players, because they want the puck and they want people that can give them the puck. So, in the case of the West Coast Express, you had two guys who wanted the puck all the time, Marcus Naslin and Todd Bertuzzi. And they liked playing with each other because they knew that Todd's power and Marcus's adept shooting could really complement each other. And they liked the idea of raising their hands at the end of the play. That's what their goal was. They always wanted to go out and score, and then finding the guy that could handle their two personalities, which were both strong personalities. Todd had a very strong personality, because he was a strong person. He was a forceful guy, and at that time, he was one of the best power forwards in the game. And on the other side, you had Marcus, who was as good a shooter as I've ever seen come out of Sweden. Sweden is generally,
Really?
most Swedish players are great playmakers. And I think that comes from the mentality. A lot of times in Sweden, it's you get complimented for the pass way more than you do for the shot. And I've had a
Yeah.
lot of discussions with people from Sweden about that. But they've developed some great scorers. Forsberg in Nashville is one of the premier scorers in the National Hockey League, and certainly there are great scores, but Marcus was a very, very positive, selfish shooter. When he had that puck, he knew he had the best opportunity to put the puck in the net, and to have that confidence was really a big thing. And so he liked playing with guys who could find him and could get him the puck. And Brendan Morrison was the guy that kind of held that line together because he had a great knack of giving the puck to the right person at the right time. And he was equally adept at going on his forehand and his backhand. And
That's an interesting observation.
yeah,
Yeah.
hitting Todd on his forehand or hitting Marcus with his backhand. He was really good at that, and he could handle the fact that a lot of people yelled at him. Marcus would from time to time. Todd did a lot, and I did a lot more. So he could handle all of that, and that's why he was so good with them. He could just handle all the noise, and believe me, there was a lot of noise with coming Brendan's way.
So the lesson here is you just needed to find somebody who was like an avid fisherman and would just let all that roll off his back and was really chill. And
Absolutely. And
there you go.
he always took criticism straight up. I always loved that
Yeah.
about Brendan. He'd look you right in the eye and he'd go, "Yep, okay, I got that." And he was a straight up guy, and that's disarming. Like for
Yeah.
a volatile, energy filled guy like me, when you hear that and you see it, he's engaged the message and he's gotten the message, then sometimes that's really calming for a person like me. So I really appreciated Brendan because of that. But the other thing that he was really good at is he always, always had a positive outlook. Like he was always smiling. Even when he lost his teeth at a game, and he lost two of his front teeth or three of them in a game in Detroit, he ended up scoring in overtime, and he had the biggest smile on his toothless face that night. So he was definitely power of positive thinking. I think that was one of his greatest attributes.
So Mark, the early part of your career again, you get a cup, you win the Jack Adams Trophy, and then you get named the head coach of Canada's Olympic team in the first time they're it's best on best, and obviously Canada doesn't. You run into a pretty good goaltender. You guys go into the shootout, and I know there's been a lot of. I've always wondered this, like if there was analytics in those days, maybe the decisions on who took the shootout maybe would have been more obvious. And it's easy to, in hindsight, to say coulda, woulda, shoulda. But what did you learn about, like, at the end of the day, so much of this job is, it's almost like a game show. It's like I don't get like 3 days to make a decision. I maybe get 3 minutes if I'm lucky, and I got to have some conviction, and that's the gig. And it's so funny. We just posted it the other day. It was Ryan Day, the head coach of Ohio State football, which I mean is its own pressure cooker, and Jim Tressel, the previous one of the previous head coaches, was interviewing him, and he said, like, he goes, you were an assistant for a long time, then you become the head coach, and he's like, what was the difference? He's like, man, he's like, he goes, I don't know if I could have appreciated it as an assistant coach, but I didn't realize the weight that came with I've got to be the one that makes the decision. And all of our fans, all of our management, doesn't matter how much groupthink is involved. It's ultimately going to be viewed as my decision. So, long-winded way of asking you, what have you learned about making decisions under pressure?
Well, I think again, you have to trust your instincts. Um, you know, your instincts are largely why they're hiring you, is because they feel that you have uh, the right um, the right mindset to be able to make those decisions under pressure. I think secondarily, I would say is get as much information from other people as you possibly can in the limited time that you've got. Like, there's always a second or two to turn to your assistant or turn to your other assistant if you've got a couple of them, and find out what their opinion is. But generally, you've got to trust that little voice in the back of your mind that we all have, and it's part of our conscience. It's part of our just innate ability to survive, to be able to listen to that voice. and trust that that's usually the prevailing thought, or the thought that you should be giving. And in the case of the shootout in Nagano, I mean, the NHL hadn't used the shootout yet, and it was just in its infancy. I think the American League had just started to use it, and it had been used in Europe. And if you really look at that game against the Czechs, I mean, we outchanced the Czechs, I think 6-0 in the overtime. So we were all over them, and we did everything but score. Hasek but they were very happy to try and get to the shootout. And I think in hindsight, looking at it, they were more comfortable. They knew that they had the chance in the shootout.
His world championships, they all would have gone through that,
Yeah,
right? Kind of growing up. That would have been
yeah,
part of the game. Yeah, that's a great
yeah.
point.
And so, I think we recognized that going into the tournament, and the other coaches, especially Andy Murray and Mike Johnson, who were the coaches of Team Canada at the time, and they were very familiar um, with international play. Um, we did a lot of dissecting about what we were going to do if we got into the shootout. At the end of the day, from our original list, which would have had, in our early meetings, it would have had Mario Lemieux, Joe Sakic, and Paul Kariya be a part of our shootout. I mean, none of them were available in that game. So because Mario Lemieux had cancer and didn't come, we kept the spot open for him right till the last minute in case because he was on the recovery mode and he started playing the next year. Um, Paul Kariya got injured right before the event and couldn't play. He tried, he came over, but he couldn't. And Joe Sakic got hurt in the in the quarterfinal. In the last play of the game, he got a knee injury that put him out for the rest of the year. So not only did we lose him with Team Canada, but I was coaching Colorado that year, and we ended up losing Joe until the first game of the playoffs. So it was a double barrel, uh, you know, catastrophe
Yeah.
that going into that shootout. There you were, and if you watch the tape, you watch the Czechs. They're all arm in arm, and they're comfortable, and they're in the moment. And our guys, myself included, are terrified because we've never been there before. And I think
And I would
that
think like, and you're going,
that
and who's in net has to play a big
yeah,
factor in
and
that.
that was the when I look back at it, that terrified probably is too strong a word, but we weren't comfortable. We weren't
For sure.
comfortable for sure. And I think that was the prevailing thought. You look at it too, it was 30 minutes on the ice without a flood, without a scrape, without anything. I mean, it was like playing on
Really?
Lambeau Field, the frozen tundra of Landro.
Yeah, I was going to say
Yeah.
like the ice bowl. Yeah.
So, our thought was we didn't think there would be a lot of opportunities for really fancy goals. We felt that we had to have shooters
Yeah.
that were and that was probably a mistake, in hindsight. Again, would I change? Yeah, I'd probably change, but would I change my thinking at that time? No, I I thought that I put out the guys that gave us the best opportunity to win, and I wasn't right, and the Czech team was. At the end of the day, Eric Lindros hit the post and it went out. Robert Reichel, who scored for the Czechs, the only goal that they scored against Patrick Roy, he hit the post and went in. So that was the difference in the game, and the Czechs found a way, and that was a storybook championship for them. But there were a lot of reasons why we didn't win. But we had a team that played real hard and played extremely well. And other than the first 10 minutes of the game, I thought we played really well for the other 60 minutes of the game, because it ended up being a 70-minute game.
Well, you know what we saw. You always think about an international competition, like the benefits of a 7 game series. We just saw it with Canada and the Swiss in the semifinals, where if it's they get more than one crack, maybe a different outcome. And I also think like in the time that we've done this show, like the one thing I've come to appreciate that coaching is effectively a bunch of decisions you're going to make, and it's the chasm is you're either a genius or you're the opposite of a
Oh yes,
genius. There's no
I've
middle
been called a
ground.
non-genius many times for my decisions with the Olympic
Yeah, but
team.
you
I,
don't
I joke
yeah,
with
and you tried to
everybody. I said my tombstone will have "Here lies Marc Crawford, the dumbass that didn't choose Gretzky in the shootout."
but you know what? I think it's, and I appreciate you being like, really candid with it, because I think for, you know, it's a different stage, right? But so many of the coaches listening to this, whether they're in their small towns coaching junior hockey or maybe even just their communities coaching minor hockey, it's maybe not the Olympics, but that walk through the parents at the end of the game where they feel like it's stressful,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like
Hey, the
it's at some point. Mike Babcock said it best on this show. He's like, at some point we need people to lead, and if we put people in a position where they're scared shitless to lead, we're in trouble. Like our game's in trouble. So we got to applaud the people that step up. And Mark, I got two more, and I know you're on the clock here, but um, coaching trees. I'm fascinated by coaching trees. And we're and I think in the NFL we've got Bill Belichick and just all the coaches that sort of came up through him and maybe learning his way. Bill Parcells would be another one. You've got a fascinating one. You talk about Joel Quenneville, Jacques Martin, Andy Murray, Mike Johnston. So many of your assistants have gone on to had remarkable careers, but you've also had a lot of former players that have gotten into coaching or management, whether it's Adam Foote, Patrick Waugh, Joe Sakic's running the Avalanche now. But who's the one player you thought would have made a great coach that just kind of rode off into the
I
sunset?
thought the guy that would have made the greatest coach was Mike Keane. And Mike works for the Winnipeg Jets. He's really comfortable in his development role there. And I tried to hire Mike about three different times because I loved the way Mike saw the game. And I loved the way that he analyzed not only players but penalty kill. I mean, in the penalty killing meeting in Colorado, we had him, Patrick Waugh, Claude Lemieux, Peter Forsberg, and the interaction that those guys would have with each other. I mean, it was amazing, and it was almost comical at times to see the depth of uh, of detail that they would look at and speaking player to player, and just how they interacted with each other. He had a real coach's mind, and I thought he would have made an outstanding coach. I'm sorry that he never listened to me and came and maybe got some experience with me. But on the other side, Mike's been able to live in Winnipeg his whole life since his career.
The
First
community
problem
guy,
with
yeah.
Mike is he never wanted to retire. So he played till he was in his 40s. Played in the American League for the last 5 years of his career, and that in itself is a
There's
testament.
something in the water in the
Yeah,
prairies, Mark. Nobody wants
but
to leave.
there's a guy that just you had to literally basically take the skates away from him to get him to stop playing at the end of his career. And he still would be playing, I think, if people would let him. But I always loved Mike, and I thought he would be the one guy that probably could have been an outstanding coach in the National Hockey League. But he's happy, and he's probably happy because he understands that coaching does things like this to people.
Well, listen, speaking of you know c- coaches and just the lifers in the game, so these playoffs for me have been really special because my 5-year old is so invested in it,
Nice.
and we get to watch the game, and he gets to watch, if he's lucky, he does his chores, he gets to watch the first period of, we're on the West Coast here, and it's really cool. And he loves the Canucks, and he'll ask, like, he's just assumed that because he loves the Canucks so much, and we live close to Vancouver, he'll say, like, do you think I'll be able to play with Quinn Hughes? Like, will he still be around when I get to play for the team? And that magic's awesome. But we're watching the games, and the Vancouver Canucks did something really cool at the start of their sort of, the pageantry that goes on before the games now, is they'd have a young player skate out. Sometimes it was a former player's child. I think Kessler's son did it. And they'd skate out to center ice with a stick with a white towel on it. And they'd shine the spotlight. And that kind of kicked off the festivities. So my son says, why is a kid skating out to the middle of the ice with a towel on a stick? And so, sometimes your kids when they're young ask you questions and you really have to think about how you're going to explain it. And this was so I start explaining, and now next thing you know, we're on the internet, we're showing the picture of Roger Neilson, the statue, the whole story. Um, you know, I grew up with a single mom. I was a goalie, I'm convinced, because the only player that my mom knew in the NHL was Richard
Hmm.
Brodeur. And she was convinced he was the greatest player of all. Like, he was Wayne Gretzky, because that's just who she knew, because she grew up in that
Yeah.
run that you guys went on. In a couple minutes, and this isn't really a direct question, other than in the time that we've done the coaches site, I don't know if anybody's had more impact, certainly on coaches, than Roger Neilson. And you start to appreciate just how special the relationships were, whether it was through his hockey school, through the clinic, and just everything he did. In the moment that you were part of that, when he puts that flag up, did you realize maybe how unique he was as a person, and also that you were living through what has become woven into the history of the game? Um, that, and especially for us out on the West Coast, this is like King Arthur pulling the sword out of the
Yeah.
stone for us.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I didn't realize how big it was, or that it would evolve into what it's become, where people wave towels now in almost every arena, not only in
It's
North
crazy.
America, but also in Europe. Uh,
In every
yeah.
sport.
And
Yeah.
it is amazing. I don't think Roger thought it was going to be that big, but he certainly did have it become that big. I can remember when it happened. That was the one game that I didn't play in that Chicago series. So I'm in the old Chicago Stadium. I was actually standing by the stairs where he used to walk down the stairs. And so when Roger gets
Yeah.
thrown out of the game, he's coming there, and I'm actually at the door. And I meet him, and I walk down with him down the stairs. And I'd worked at Roger's hockey school, and I knew Roger on a personal level, even at that young age
Yeah.
when I'm 21 years old. And I, I remember asking him as I walked down, I said, "What do you think they're going to do to you?" He says, crap fakes. I don't know. Roger was kind of a man.
He didn't swear, right? He didn't swear. It
Never
would have been
heard the
all
man
crap.
ever swear in my entire life, and
Yeah.
I knew Roger for a long time, for at least 25 years. And no, he was a fantastic man. He was well thought out, but he actually, I think that the biggest compliment that I could give Roger is Roger really appreciated the character of, of all the players that he had. And that team, that 82 team that I played for with Vancouver, even though we got beat four straight by a spectacular Hall of Fame New York Islander team with Potvin and Bossy and Goring and Clark Gillies, and just so many great players on that team. Billy Smith. Um, that was a marvelous Vancouver team, and it was all character people. You look at the people that it had. Colin Campbell, who's the vice president of the National Hockey League. What a character defenseman he was. And he was Rogers' captain in Peterborough, and just a true disciple of Rogers, and a great friend of his uh, as well. It had Harold Snaps, Lars Lindgren, who was one of the funniest and biggest and hardest guys to play against. Everybody on that team was hard to play against, and they all kind of had a connection. Doug Hallward had played for him in Peterborough. You look up front, everybody loved Stan Smeal, and Roger, made him the captain when Kevin McCarthy got hurt. Thomas Gradine, great player. Kurt Fraser was a tough guy, and Roger used tough guys so well. And man, Fraz had an outstanding playoff. And then we had guys like Jimmy Nell, who's now the general manager
Of course.
of,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he had gotten to Vancouver on a late trade from St. Louis, and stepped in on a line with Jivan Ivan Boldarev and Darcy Rhoda. And they were all, it was all good, hardy guys. Tiger Williams, who Roger had coached in Toronto, and we had two centermen, Jerry Miner and Gary Lupo, who were outstanding, just character guys. And everybody you talk about on the team, Ron Delorme was the other tough guy on the team, as tough
Of
as
course,
nails.
man.
I was fortunate enough I got to play on on the left side and take about 14 shifts during my 17 games in the playoffs that year. But it was just fun to be involved. Ivan Hlinka was the big Czech centerman who came in,
Yeah.
and uh, and again, we were a team that really defended well, but we found such great chemistry, and it was because of the character of the group. I would be remiss to. Uh, Roger always found a guy that could check really well, and Lars Molin played for the Canucks for about 6 years. Uh, He was a great checker, and you could match him
Yeah.
up against anybody's uh, top group, and he almost always found a way to silence that guy. When it got against Mike Bossy, of course, they were just another level with Trottier and Gillies. But Roger was a real magnificent guy. He left no stone unturned. What I learned from Roger more than anything was the value of preparation, the value of organization, and just the value of people. I think he doesn't get enough credit for how well he monitored and assessed people. Um, but his organization and his preparation are legendary, and it's why I think coaching is as good as it is now, not only in the National Hockey League but across Canada, because he has a coaching tree that is probably the biggest of anybody that in my lifetime.
Mark, that's a great place to close. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Uh,
It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, this was very good. I enjoyed it, and hopefully that people are watching it are enjoying their own journeys into coaching, and hopefully they're having a good time doing what we're doing. We love coaching. It's what drives us. It's a fun way to make a living.